Jason, aboard?
I'm aboard.
I can't use a regular term. With Mike and I on, we have to use a nautical term.
Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the Cash-Flow Memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
We're going to start on Exhibit C. Exhibit C is all about what's going on in Iran. As near as we can see, it's hard to make predictions in a situation like this. As near as we can see, we're going to come through Iran without anything happening to the Straits of Hormuz, without Houthi Iranian missiles going into Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi. And the only question is, how will it wind up? And what we think will happen is that it'll just kind of sputter out 2 or 3 weeks from now. So Exhibit C, with that 3.5 million barrels of extra supply, is just, the implications of that are just postponed for, 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something. You turn to the bottom of Exhibit B, that you can see this is pricing from last Thursday. Oil stiffened considerably, and it's now in 72, 73 range. But you see the backwardation. Your 26 price has come up a little, but it's only come up a couple of bucks. So you have a fair amount of backwardation now. All this is good for gas. On prior Wednesdays, you hear me wring my hands about gas production in 25 being more in the 106, dry gas. And you see the table above, which has the Permian going up by 7 million Bs a day. The Permian production has slowed down. And even with $4 gas, Haynesville hasn't really started to catch up. So 106, actually, there were a couple of days last week where it was 105. So that makes me much more confident in that estimate for 25 of 380. And as you can see, as of last Thursday, the strip price for 25 was 390, and the strip price for 26 was 425. One of my weekend projects this weekend is to update all this, and it's actually looking pretty positive for gas. The Senate now has come up with its version of the big beautiful bill. I think it's got enough alignment with the House version, so there's a chance that both bills will clear conference and be on the president's desk to sign before the 4th of July. I think for investing, that's good. The deficit is still too high. I have it at 1.8 trillion here, which would be an improvement from fiscal 25. What we really need is 27 to be 1.5, 1.6. There has to be some curtailed spending. As you can see from the headlines, lots of focus on the Medicaid program, which you can see is kind of flatlined. It's interesting, from 23 to now, it's kind of flatlined in the 600 billion range. The one which is considered to be kind of third rail of politics is don't interfere with Medicare. But I don't know how much real saving there is there. It's that all other category, which reached almost 3 trillion in the COVID years. And unfortunately, in the Biden years, they didn't curtail it enough. You can see in this forecast for 26, it's 1.2 trillion down from 1.3. I think that's where the savings will be. So the idea that that $2 trillion deficit is just going to disappear, I think the best we can hope for is maybe 150 billion, 200 billion a year decline, so that the amount of outstanding debt will continue to go up, but it'll start to be a lower percentage of GNP. Mike, Jason, anything to add there?
There's been a lot of talk about Medicaid, mainly because some of the states apply those funds to either non-citizens or people that other states and maybe the federal government thinks that they should not be providing services to. So California and New York specifically are in the crosshairs for that. So it'd be interesting to see how that shakes out. In the state of California, I have a sketch of essentially the same page, Exhibit A, except for California. And it would be scary if the government withdrew some of that funding, because they say it's about a third of the budget.
As long as we're on spending in healthcare, before we finish, get through another episode of the history of chips, Jason has said in prior Wednesdays, and presumably it's still the case, that the leadership of RFK Jr. and the different people that have been put in charge of the agencies is all very positive. So, I mean, at the very least, maybe we have healthcare spending kind of flatten out the way Medicaid has. I don't know whether that's possible in the Medicare system, but Jason, you're still kind of tend towards being optimistic there, given the quality of the people that have been put in place in these various healthcare agencies.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah, you can have the good news or the bad news first today, but I guess I'll start with the bad news. Something that occurred 2 weeks ago now was RFK Jr. let go all 17 members of the CDC's immunization committee. You could easily read that as very bad news, and I think we'll have to see how it plays out. A little background on why that occurred is 13 of these 17 members were just nominated in last year, towards the end of the Biden administration's term. So the people serve on the committee for 4-year terms. They're supposed to roll off about 4 every year. During Biden's term, they weren't appointing new members, and they appointed them all at the end. I don't think this was like malicious against a new president coming in, but that's what occurred. So given RFK's situation, if he wanted to make a change at this committee, it kind of had to be wholesale. He kind of had to let everyone go and replace them all. And he has announced the replacements, or at least some of them. I believe 8 people he's going to nominate on the board. A couple of them have anti-vax stances. Most of them are critical of how we handled the COVID pandemic and rolling out the vaccines there. So we'll see how this plays out. At the same time, the FDA approved a new version of the COVID vaccine last week. So, there's ammo on both sides to say they are going to be anti-vaccine, and then maybe they're not, and it's going to kind of be status quo with a little more testing. So that's the bad news. The good news is really good. There's 2 things that occurred in the last couple of weeks. The first one was the FDA held a cell and gene therapy roundtable discussion. So they hosted CEOs of several biotechs, took their feedback, kind of discussed their plans going forward, but heard what all these companies would like to see out of the FDA in the next few years. So it is really interesting. They're having a public forum for that kind of discourse. One thing that came out of that discussion that I noted and wrote down that was, I think it's good, but kind of astonishing it came out of this group of people, was something Dr. Oz proposed. He proposed that curative gene therapies, we could socialize the expenses of those treatments, since they are, usually they're $1 million up treatments. We socialize that, and then we pay based on the effectiveness of that treatment for that individual, over the next couple of years of their life. So, right now there's not really an appetite for the insurance companies and the payers to pay for a several $7 million gene therapy, since statistically they're going to roll off that insurance plan within the next couple of years, and they'd rather just treat the disease than cure the disease at a much higher cost. So very interesting. They proposed socializing these very expensive cures, but in the long run, it absolutely saves money. And they did discuss, not Vertex by name, but the gene therapy that can cure sickle cell, and it'll cost $2 million, but the amount of care and treatment these people use within the hospital system on a regular basis far exceeds that in their lifetime. So that was interesting. The other thing was the FDA. And I never thought I would say this, but the FDA is the first government agency really pushing AI adoption.
Somehow it's the fastest moving part of government all of a sudden.
Yeah, so they rolled out an AI tool. One place they said they are going to use it is reviewing clinical trial protocols and new drug applications, the data sets that come in, the data that's all collected during a study. So they rolled the system out a month ahead of time and have seen early successes with it. So they're going to use it across the board. They're really prioritizing this. Those 2 areas that I mentioned are really ripe for this kind of tool to innovate. So Mike and I were actually involved in a startup that was using some of this early language processing, machine learning techniques to analyze clinical trial protocols. They're very highly structured. It's something that AI could be great at reviewing, pointing out blind spots. So many trials fail because you failed in your study design. And if the FDA can point that out ahead of time as you apply to run your study, that's just going to save a lot of time and money for all these companies. And then submitting the data sets that go with new drug applications, they're huge and often submitted on paper. So if we can do it electronically, or if we can just do it on paper, scan it and have AI read it and make assessments and point out the things that need to be looked at, that's a big win. And then the last thing I want to mention is they announced a new priority review voucher program. So something like this exists today. The normal review time that the FDA takes is about a year. You can get a review voucher today, and they're kind of scarce, but you can get one, and it reduces that review time down to 6 months. And that has a value. And ironically, one was just traded this week, and it was sold for $160 million. So saving 6 months of time is worth $160 million. The new one they're talking about is reducing the review time down to 1 or 2 months. So they'll have a decision turned around in under 2 months. And what I really think is, and I've long suspected this, I have no evidence of this, but that the FDA kind of procrastinates. You submit your new drug application, it probably sits on someone's desk for several months, and then, lo and behold, a week before the PDUFA date, that the date they said they would provide a decision to you, that's when it comes. So they typically always wait until the end. So if we can move that deadline up, initially through these review vouchers, and then maybe we make the deadline really just 2 months for all reviews, and we streamline that process. That'd be huge.
Yeah, I think it's essentially an opportunity to trial a new process where they accept data early, make assessments earlier, so that way you don't wait until the study's totally completed. You wait for them to print out all the data, put it on giant trucks, and ship it over to the FDA, and then manually go through it all. Instead, you're receiving data throughout the study, going into the final approval. They already pretty much know everything they're looking for. So it changes it from, I guess, a reactive process to a proactive process, which would be good for everybody in the industry.
Yeah, and a lot of time is taken throughout. We say it takes 10 years to get a drug to market or approved by the FDA, and a lot of time is spent with the ball in the FDA's court. So if they can minimize that as much as possible, it has huge implications down the line. Because I think the average time span that a pharma company has with their drug commercialized on patent is about 7 years. So if you can make that 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, that's a huge bump to the value of that drug.
What we've done, we've blown through all our chip history time. We're down to about 12 minutes left. So we're going to have to go to page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. For you listeners, we will not abandon chip history. We will be back on it next week. But I think what we've just gone through with Mike and Jason is much more relevant for now, because you cannot beat the spending problem without doing healthcare. And I think the good news is, as they've strung out very competently, is that progress is being made in how these government agencies are being managed, which is just terrific. Any news on page 1? We know that Apple is still not getting it done on their software, but they seem to be, as a stock market investment, Jason, they seem to be surviving that. But any hope there, or is how vulnerable are they? Let's say that artificial intelligence a year from now is no more than it is now. How vulnerable do you think Apple is?
I think the longer they wait, the more vulnerable they get. We're just going to see a lot of new software products be released on Android a lot sooner. And they gave the date they won't have an updated Siri until at least spring of next year. So they're giving the market 3 quarters head start. They could catch up and release a great product in everyone stays in the Apple ecosystem. But there's a danger that doesn't happen.
Yeah, the door's cracked open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, they're for sure going to sell less iPhone 17s, and their free cash flow, which is just around 100 billion. I think the best you can hope for is a flat line there. And then Mike, the expert, married to a litigator, but you got that 20 billion of Google payments that I would think any Google settlement is going to result in those payments going away. Being a Google stockholder, I don't want to say they're being monopolistic, but paying 20 billion a year to be the default search solution for every iPhone does seem kind of monopolistic behavior, frankly.
Well, and comparing that to the other proposals that have been made as to how to rectify the issue, I think that's certainly the least painful one.
I don't think there's a dollar for dollar increase in Alphabet's free cash flow because, their search monopoly has to be reduced somewhat. And then they have the competition from, every language model, but especially Perplexity.
Yeah, that's right. And, there's plenty of time to work this out in the courts, so it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow. Apple's been working on search for quite a while, so they'll have something as an alternative if this ends up, they've got a plan B.
Jason, Mike, and I had already discussed this on our morning meetings, 20 minutes every morning, 5:30 his time, 8:30 my time. Rather remarkable to see in print media that OpenAI is considering bringing an antitrust complaint against Microsoft because they can't get Microsoft's share of the OI revenue down. Clearly, OpenAI and Microsoft are in competition for subscription revenue for language programs, but this doesn't seem resolvable. It might almost be easier to resolve Iran than to resolve that dispute. It just seems to go on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if there's validity to that claim. I don't know what you guys decided, but it sounds like there's probably not. I think the out that OpenAI has is if they declare that their models have achieved artificial general intelligence, that's when, I don't know if the contract dissolves or there's some provision where they no longer have to share revenue with Microsoft, something like that. So I'm not going to be shocked when OpenAI is the first to achieve artificial general intelligence. Whether it actually is or not, they're going to claim it. Yeah. And no one has a agreed definition of that. So yeah, how do you dispute that?
Right. The other thing, Jason, I've been talking about is is a 33% stake in the go public version of OpenAI. Is that a great deal for Microsoft? And I think what Microsoft's been saying, or at least alluding to, is that they really just want access to the models more than anything. But their actions sort of speak the other way. They're basically saying in their enterprise business, we're going to host any model. Right. So I don't know. Maybe everybody's posturing a little bit, and maybe they'll get to a nice conclusion relatively soon.
Hi everyone. I'm Daniel Escudero, an ILCA 7 sailor. My goal is to qualify for the LA 2028 Olympics and win the USA's first ever ILCA 7 Olympic medal. But today, I want to talk to you about something bigger than me, something for the whole American sailing community, the top mark ranking system. With the help of Hunt, Mike, and Ford McCann, it will start off by covering the American ILCA 7 class and will be spreading soon to other classes. American ILCA 7 sailors currently don't have a clear, fair, and consistent way of measuring performance across domestic and international events. The top mark rankings changed that. It ranks American ILCA 7 sailors against each other using a transparent, points-based system that rewards consistency, difficulty, and depth of competition. Whether you're an athlete, coach, parent, or fan of American sailing, this system makes it easier to understand who's performing. I invite you to learn more, check out the rankings, and join the movement at topmarkrankings.com, because succeeding at the Olympics isn't just about talent, it's about building the right foundation. You can also follow my journey, support my campaign, or learn more at escuderosailing.com. Go USA!
Speaking of print and digital media, Jason, you and Mike should have stayed as coders or something, or extra special coders, because Mark Zuckerberg might have hired you for $100 million bonus to try to make up for the fact that the Llama model was kind of unimpressive. Or do you think that's just Sam Altman mouthing off?
Well, I think, yeah, he's mouthing off for sure. It is very difficult to attract and retain talent. And you have to, you think about Anthropic, I think about Anthropic in particular, because OpenAI has a cult that of the original people who really started the transformer model and really started modern AI. So they naturally are going to draw talent. Anthropic has kind of centered themselves around this like safe AI thing, and that's attracted a lot of talent. And Meta is now just going to rip the gloves off and say, we're just going to make sure that you're better compensated here than anywhere else. And to say that that's not a great way to do it, I mean, why not? I mean, that's, everybody wants to have an angle. The angle that Meta has is that they're a going concern. You look at the financials of OpenAI, and they're the best underfunded or the best cash burning startup. It's not ideal. They're going to have to raise a lot of money. It gets much worse if you look at XAI. Apparently, they are burning $1 billion a month and expected only to do $500 million in revenue this year and $2 billion next year. So Meta is actually in a pretty powerful position to both use stock and cash to lure these developers. And I think the reality we're coming to is the hardware is advancing so quickly. There's actually very few people that are capable of squeezing all the power out of the hardware, which is very different than where we were 12 months ago. So it's going to be a different year this year, I think.
All right. We're almost out of time. We get criticized if we don't go through the healthcare stocks. We put a fair amount of chunk into the macro healthcare, but anything new on Vertex Pharmaceutical or Lantheus or Harrow or some of the ones Hotmark doesn't own, like BioNTech and but other interesting healthcare companies?
Kind of related to what I was talking about before, Vertex has the opportunity to, if one of these priority review vouchers were to be available to them for their cure for type 1 diabetes, and this is just, again, speculation, but if that was a possibility for them, that program only started in 2021. And here we are starting a phase 3 in 2025, and then they could collect a year's worth of data and have that reviewed then in 2 months. And this time next year could have an FDA approved cure for type 1 diabetes. And that would be a 5-year time span, start to finish. So that'd be a good, calling card early on in this tenure of the new FDA administration to say, like, hey, here we've cured type 1 diabetes in half the time of normal.
Wasn't there a kind of a disappointing trial?
Yes. So they have a stem cell treatment that is transplanted into the patient to have their pancreas make insulin again. That requires immunosuppressants. So the population of people, the subpopulation that are willing to go through that out of the total amount of people that have type 1 diabetes is I think they said it's about 60,000 people that are going to be eligible for this. The thing that failed was a device that encapsulates the individual cells so that the immune system doesn't attack and reject them. That didn't work. So that's disappointing that it won't have essentially a cure for all type 1 diabetics. They said they scrapped that part of the program. They're going to look at other potential solutions there. They're not giving up on that, but really what they're pushing forward is this version that cures it, but you're on immunosuppressants.
I think we have a couple of minutes left because we skipped the history of chips. If we could just giving an outline of what we'll do next week so that we don't disappoint people. I think where we left them was Intel and kind of the development of the Intel monopoly. But you give us minutes on what we'll do next week on the history of chips.
Yeah, we'll do a little lead in here. So we'll wrap up Wintel. We'll cover a little bit about AMD and kind of where they came back to life. And then we'll jump into Jason's part of his career specialty, distributed computing, which was basically the precursor to cloud computing. And then if we have time, we'll jump into mobile. And then after mobile, I think we'll get into GPUs.
And fabless.
Oh, yeah.
production.
We got to touch on Taiwan Semiconductor and fabless semiconductor companies.
Yeah. The other thing we want to do while we have a couple of minutes left, and you guys can direct people, the best thing I've listened to on a podcast, better even than the Telltale podcast, was the podcast with Morris Chang. I absolutely recommend it. Just for background, Morris Chang, you'll remember Gwendolyn and Holly last August. Gwen wrote a particularly good profile of Morris Chang. I think that's still up on your website if someone wants some reference on Morris Chang. But he is the founder of Taiwan Semiconductor. We talk about NVIDIA, we talk about AMD, we talk about Apple's chips, and we talk about Google's alternatives to the NVIDIA chips. Nothing works without Taiwan Semiconductor. And that company was created out of whole cloth by Morris Chang moving to Taiwan. And the two acquired podcast hosts asked Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA, to set them up for an interview with Morris Chang, who had just written a biography, an autobiography, in Chinese. And so it hadn't yet been translated. And Morris Chang said yes. So the two guys doing the acquired podcast were on the next plane to go to Taiwan to interview Morris Chang. And just for people on the phone, too, it's 2 or 3 hours of podcast. First of all, it's very interesting. He is an incredibly gifted mind. He's up in years, but there's nothing wrong with his brain. And the history of the development of Taiwan Semiconductor is absolutely fascinating. If you're going to own any of the chip designers or anything to do with hardware connected with AI, to not listen to that Morris Chang podcast is, first of all, it's very entertaining. And second of all, it's very educational. And with that, Mike, Jason, have I overstated the case?
Not at all. And we'll include both those links to that podcast and to Gwendolyn's article on Taiwan Semiconductor in the email today. So if you're not already on the email list, go to telltales.us and sign up.
Okie doke. With that, everyone be well, healthy, and we'll be back here exactly 7 days from now. Take care, everyone.
The views expressed on this podcast are the host alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to and no reliance should be placed on the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.